Welcome to the Endurance Drive podcast.
Our mission is to share the key principles that structure our approach to endurance training and coaching.
I'm Jim.
And I'm Katie. And Jim, I'm glad that you're alive. We've got some updates. They're not so great, but I think we've got to start with that.
We do have some updates. Turns out triathlon does have some dangers.
It does. So for those that don't know, I think some of Jim's athletes know, but we have some listeners who are not our athletes and some of my athletes as well. Jim had a little tumble off the bike. I guess it was a little over a week ago now, and I guess it led to some not so great bone action. So Jim, do you want to tell us what happened a couple of weeks ago?
Sure. I don't want to go into too many details because it's a little bit gross, but yeah, I was practicing for the Polar Bear Triathlon, which is my annual sprint triathlon that we do, and just been doing a little ride, 30 minutes up the highway and then 30 minutes back. So 30 minutes warm up, turn around, do some intervals. And so in the past, I literally have been riding 30 minutes. I stop my bike. I physically turn my bike or my TT bike around, and then I go back. And this time I was feeling good in my warm up, and I thought, well, I'll just pull into the bank parking lot and just kind of keep this momentum rolling and roll back onto the road. But it turns out there's like a 360 turn driveway in the bank, and it turns out they have a piece of really smooth cement that leads into the walkway into their bank, and that was also coated with fine sand. So 1 second I was up, and the next second I was down, and so unfortunately I spiral fractured my femur and my hip.
Yeah, and for those non-medical people out there, that's a pretty big injury. That's pretty scary. So that rolled into surgery the next day, right?
Yeah, so I just rolled into just quick action, but thankfully for the bank ladies who came out and found me lying and screaming on the ground, and the EMTs and the ambulance. And we have a great hospital here with great surgeons and great staff. And so everybody quick into action. And I was in the hospital for a couple of days, went in on Monday afternoon and got out on Wednesday afternoon.
Yeah, so that's a really, really big injury, and I'm really sorry that happened. It's interesting because we were just kind of talking about fears of big bike crashes in our fears episode, and it's a really valid fear, and this was kind of like a freak thing. There wasn't a car involved. You weren't doing anything wrong, and I can attest that Jim's a really good bike handler, so sometimes this stuff just happens. But I guess maybe I'd like to ask you, Jim, how has this felt so far? Physically, how has it felt mentally? What have your takeaways been? And I know this is probably going to be like an evolving situation over the next weeks and months.
Yeah, like I said, it's a freak accident. And I think, I've been probably a little bit aggressive on my road bike. And I thought, if I crash my road bike, I kind of deserve it. But these things happen, these freak things happen, and that's okay. But I think in general, just reflecting back on the entire experience, I just keep coming back to the word grateful. And just grateful for so many things. First and foremost, I'm grateful for my wife, Carrie, who's just been so supportive of the whole thing. And I can't imagine being solo, trying to take care of yourself, or if you're trying to, go to a job or have family, a lot of young kids around, it'd be super, super hard. So Carrie's just been a rock star. So shout out to her. Just grateful for friends and family who stopped by and texted and emails, and our Endurance Drive tribe that's near and far. So just really grateful for that. Thank you, everybody. And just grateful it wasn't worse. I mean, yes, it was a bad fractures, but I'm glad it wasn't like a collarbone as well, where we've had friends who have broken both legs. And so at least I'm able to sort of move around quite a bit with just having sort of one injury localized. And grateful I work from home, and that we're close to a hospital, and that also I've been injury free for many, many years. So I feel like I was due for probably a little bit of injury, but maybe I didn't would have chosen this one. But overall, just feeling very grateful for the situation, actually.
Totally. And I really want to commend you for having that perspective, because it also just sucks. Like, it's really, really hard to go through stuff like this, and being able to ground in gratitude is something that is really powerful, but also really challenging to do. And I'm sure probably there's highs and lows every single day as you're just kind of thinking through both the physical and mental of it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the easy road is to be discouraged. I think especially this spring, where I rode a lot outside. I rode about 1,600 miles, and all of that was outside. And if you live in the Northeast, you know that it's been a pretty cold and wet and snowy spring. So I feel like I suffered quite a bit to get to this point where now we're in May and the weather has finally turned. And so it just feels like the obvious course of action to say, I'm so bummed out that I'm going to miss a few months of the summer riding. I deserve it. But in fact, I just feel like it's just a speed bump. For myself and for you and for most of our athletes, we have this fitness-centric lifestyle that we have a long arc, and we're going to do this for not just weeks and months, but for years and decades, really. So I look at it that way, look at the big picture. I say this is just a short-term bump, and honestly, I'll be back outside walking around and on the bike, really before I know it.
Totally. And can you tell us actually what is the prognosis looking like right now in terms of when you're supposed to be able to do stuff again, how long this is going to take to heal, and kind of how you're going to manage the meantime from now until then?
Yeah, I mean, there's the standard, they say you could probably be running in 4 to 5 months. I haven't really asked specifically about biking, but obviously it's a break. So any break is usually about 12 weeks of healing. But what's interesting about this is they put a bunch of pins and screws in. So actually the area itself doesn't really hurt that much. And so it's actually pretty strong in that area. And the big challenge right now is just like a lot of swelling. And then that limits your range of motion. But range of motion is coming back pretty quickly every day. And I wouldn't be surprised if I could actually jump on the indoor trainer in a week or two. It wouldn't be surprising to do that. I probably obviously would wait to ride outside for the 12 weeks, but I'll see my doctor, orthopedist, a week and a half from now, and we'll sort of dig into the details. I didn't really want to go into the details when we're in the hospital because I wasn't really quite sure and I wasn't quite in the right mental space to talk about, okay, what does this really mean for my athletic career?
Totally. That makes a ton of sense. And I think, it's just going to be kind of learning every week what you're capable of. And already you said starting to feel a little bit better every single day. So I'm really happy about that. I guess my last question for you is, do you feel excited to get back on the bike? I think we know at the end of the day, this is a trauma, but it was a freak accident and it can be common to feel a little bit skittish just about that. How are you feeling about getting back on the bike?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually feel really good about getting back on the bike. But I probably am going to buy a pair of shorts that have some hip protectors for a little while and wear those for a little while. I don't think that'll be a permanent piece of my cycling gear. But yeah, there are, I think POC or POC, I'm not sure how you say the name, but they make some really nice cycling shorts that have just a little bit of hip protection. And then you also can buy like these, I think mostly for mountain biking, but you can slip in some sort of silicone hip protectors. And I think just honestly, just a little bit of protection will just give me a lot of ease and comfort going out there. But certainly, yeah, it is a traumatic experience. And I can understand when folks get hurt, whether that's biking or running or even swimming, things happen in the water and it's sometimes hard to come back from that. And it's a real process that we have to acknowledge and honor and and work through.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is awful in about a million ways, but I think we're going to learn a lot that we can hopefully share with listeners as you go through it. A lot of our athletes have gone through similar things or will go through similar things, even though we don't want them to. So we'll definitely kind of be in touch about how this is feeling. Maybe we'll have a new segment called Jim's Injury Update.
Well, hopefully it'll be short-lived. But you're right? We're coaches and we're always looking for what are the takeaways? And immediately I was writing down, what are the takeaways? And I'm super hungry and that I need to eat a lot and just all this, good protein. And it just turns out that recovery from a major injury it's just like training. It's rest and recovery, and you get up a little bit, you do some little bit of exercise, you get back on the couch, you elevate, you ice, you try to focus on protein, try to eat a lot. And I just feel like in some ways we're really well prepared for these kind of injuries because we're kind of already thinking about rest and recovery and advancement as sort of the natural default for coaches and athletes.
I think you've been training for this for your whole life. This particular injury.
Exactly. It turns out this was my A race this year.
Oh, man. All right. Well, I'm really glad that you're okay. And thank you for sharing. This is going to be super helpful for all of our listeners.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Reg. And thanks everybody out there who's sent their well wishes. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
For sure. And I think this lends really nicely into just transitioning into our normal programming. The show must go on. So Jim, do you want to kick us off with some coaching and training insights?
Sure. Yeah. So I think this has sort of rolled into something I was thinking about before the accident is this idea of 1,000 days to fitness. And I really I'm actually sort of stealing this from Gordo Bryn, who I follow quite a bit, and you guys should too as well. But it's just this idea of, importance of long-term thinking when you're starting your fitness journey or coming back from injury. And one season will move the needle, but really when you start thinking about years and years and years or 1,000 days, you really start to move the needle. So I know for myself personally, this will set me back a little bit. And I don't think it'll take me 1,000 days to get back to fitness per se, but just in general, I have some athletes who also have had major injuries or just coming back, or they've been super busy with their life. And it is interesting that I picked up a number of new clients recently, and usually you don't pick up a lot of new clients going into race season, but they're coming to me saying, I'm actually thinking about 2025 already. And so that really resonates with me because that's great because that fits in so well with this 1,000 day fitness. And so let's work together, build up an aerobic and metabolic foundation this summer. Yeah, you'll do some racing and they've got some goals for late fall, but we're really looking at 2025. And so I just love this mentality of okay, that's probably, 400, 500 days away. So that's half of that 1,000. It's okay, this really resonates with me as a coach and with them as well. So that's super exciting.
Yeah, that's great. And I had a similar conversation with an athlete recently who wants to do an Ironman like in her life, but she thinks life-wise it might make more sense to do it in, say, 5 years from now. But we're going to be working together from now until then. And recently raced a half marathon, and she's done a couple halves and all these different things. And I think it's awesome for me to think about her like 5-year plan in the context of what will we do to set you up for an amazing Ironman. Again, you can sign up for an Ironman 6 months from now and we can make it work. But if you really, really want to excel and get better in the sport, I think speaking from experience, 5 years is about what it takes to really get to that next level. So always be playing that long game is a really, really good piece of advice.
Exactly. And this is before, but patience wins in an impatient world. So yeah.
Yes.
So get on. So another shout out to our smart athletes. My second one was here that we've got a lot of racing going on. And we also have a lot of race sims going on. It seems like every weekend we've probably got 3 or 4 athletes doing race simulations. I just wanted to sort of emphasize that things are supposed to go wrong on race simulations. And this is our chance to learn. And we get three cracks. We do this at week 12, week 8, and week 4 out. And so in some ways, I kind of welcome when I see the comments, people like, oh, things just went completely off the rails on the first one. I'm like, that's great, because we don't learn those lessons on race day. And as you know, you and I both know, there's literally thousands of little things that you need to know to do triathlon, to do it right. And so those race sims just give you a chance to work through all like the big stuff and the small stuff. So if you are having a race sim or things aren't going well, don't put too much pressure on yourself. Like in some ways, things are supposed to go wrong. So it's not an A race at all. Literally, it is a simulation, an emphasis on simulation. So go out there, do your race sim, learn a bunch of stuff, make a bunch of mistakes, have a bunch of things go wrong, and then it's like, perfect. We have more cracks the race sim, and those things just won't happen on race day.
That's great advice. And I have definitely had the experience of terrible race sims and a great race day. So just because you had a terrible time on the race sim, sometimes that's a nice on-ramp to just get all of your terrible stuff out of the way. And then you go, St. George race sim week 4 for us was awful. And I think that's a good lesson.
Wasn't your first race sim like you guys ended up in the bathroom and it was raining?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it was 2017 and it was like 50 degrees and raining in Hanover. And we ended up inside, is it Watson's Auto Shop? Whatever that, right near your crash. There's this auto shop in Thetford, Vermont. And we ended up like 3 girls standing in this disgusting bathroom, putting hot water on our hands because we were that cold from the race sim. And then we had a great race at Patriot. So just nice lesson there. Get your stuff out of the way in the race sim.
Yeah. God bless New England.
God bless Watson's Automotive for sure.
Exactly.
Shout out.
Yeah. And my third point here is that, so it is warming up a little bit here in the Northeast, and I've got some athletes in the Midwest who are getting in the water regularly, but just being aware, I want to talk a little bit about cold water, first swims of the year, being outside, sort of safety. So the first one is when you go to your first swim, the water is going to tend to be pretty cold, and some people can just deal with it and just jump in the water. I'm one of those people who are very sensitive to cold water, so I like to really just ease into the water, get my hands in at first, and then splash some water on my face, and then put my face in the water and actually blow bubbles, and just spend about a minute or two just standing on the shore, just getting acclimated to the cold water. And then when you start swimming, just go super, super easy. You can keep your head sort of mostly out of the water too. It's not the greatest technique, but just go until you feel like you're warmed up, and that can be 4 or 5 minutes. And this applies to just regular open water swimming. This applies to race sims. And we've got some people coming up in the next couple of weeks who are doing racing, and the water's going to be cold. It's going to be below 60. And so for those folks, get in the water, do a warm up, but just get acclimated to that cold water.
That's really good advice. And I'd also say if you're swimming in the early season, try not to go by yourself. And if you do have to go by yourself, you want to have one of those flotation buoys. We can link that in the show notes here. And maybe that's a good gear pick of the week as well. But safety is really huge here, especially like if you're going at dawn, if it's a little dark, you never know what's out there. So going with a partner is a really good idea. Yeah,
for sure. The swim buoy has become like the number one thing. You have to have it. You cannot swim without one. So even in a group, you should take one with you because somebody might get in distress and they can come over and you can help you out. So yeah.
Great. We will link that in the show notes. And I think that's actually a nice segue. You're talking about cold weather. I'm going to talk a little bit about cold weather because as we know, there have been some okay days, but generally a pretty cold spring here in New England. And it's funny because on our last episode together, I guess that'll be 2 weeks ago when this airs live, I talked about how I went out for a bike ride in the rain and I built some RDPs, resilience data points doing that. And then this past weekend, it rained quite a bit. And I actually had like 6 or 7 athletes go out for big rides, 2, 3, 4-hour rides in pretty rainy conditions. And I would say that they had varying degrees of success with doing that. And I think a big take home here is that, yes, while riding in the rain can build resilience in some circumstances, it can also be kind of dangerous in other circumstances. So when you're in that 40 to 60 degree range, that is actually one of the easiest places to get kind of hypothermic. And in general, that's something, if you're riding somewhere that has a lot of hills, you will often have downhills where it's really, really hard to just keep your core temperature up. So when I went out for this bike ride in the rain, it was probably over 60 degrees and I was on a pretty flat route. So I was able to keep consistent power the whole time. You've probably noticed that if you run, for example, in that weather, it's not pleasant, but you can usually stay okay. But I would say if it's in that 40 to 60 degree range and it's raining a lot and you're in somewhere hilly, and if you don't have proper gear, that is not a day that you should say, all right, I'm just going to push through and do this outside. The proper gear that we're talking about here is you need to have a waterproof jacket, you need warm thermal tights, shoe covers, waterproof gloves, clear glasses is important. And at the end of the day, these are items that can be expensive and you don't need to use them all of the time. So I would say in your triage of things that you want to buy for cycling, like on a day like that, I would actually say to just stay inside. Now, if the forecast is kind of borderline and you do want to try it, you should have a good bailout option if you need to end early. So don't do something like an 80-mile ride that's a 40-mile out and back. Because if at mile 37, you're hypothermic, good luck getting home. That's not fun. And I think this whole experience also just reminded me, Jim, of maybe one of the coldest experiences we've ever had on the bike, which was in May a couple of years ago. We rode Middlebury Gap, which is a big hill climb in Vermont. You climb about probably 2,000 feet, and then it started raining when we were on the top. It wasn't supposed to rain. It was a nice day otherwise, and we descended, and it was scary. Like when you're shaking and you can't really control the bike, that is a really, really dangerous situation to be in. So again, I'm not trying to scare anybody here, and I love people going out and just trying to get after it and build those RDPs. But at the end of the day, safety is our biggest concern here. So I would say be wary about going out in the rain unless you definitely have that proper gear, and unless it's like probably over 60 degrees, I would kind of avoid that outdoor riding.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. And the thing I would add to that list is either like a headband or a hat. After our Middlebury experience, I started carrying a hat pretty regularly on those types of days when I know it's going to go higher. And if there's a chance of rain up high, just being able to put a warm hat underneath your helmet and descend with that along with the wind jacket was super important.
Yeah. And actually, quick shout out on that. I would say some of the athletes that got really cold in this rain ride then went inside and finished their rides on the trainer. That is a major RDP. So shout out to people that got freezing and came in and warmed up and finished their big ride inside.
That's a baller move. Yeah. Congratulations. That's huge. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
All right. Next one here, still on this bike theme. I just wanted to share another bike safety insight. We talked about this on our live call with our athletes last night. Again, Jim had a crash that was not related to a car, but I've had athletes reporting a lot of sort of close calls with cars recently, and it seems like the drivers are just getting worse and worse with respect to cyclists. So we have said this before, but please stop what you are doing and order a Garmin Varia radar light. It's a light that beeps at you when there's cars coming up behind you. It flashes extra bright when there are cars, and this makes a huge difference. Also, wear bright colors. That's a big one. And a third one, I don't know if everyone knows this, but you shouldn't be stopping to pause your watch or bike computer when you stop at like a stop sign or a traffic light. You can just turn on auto pause. That's a setting on Garmin where it will pause for you. But I've seen people like fumbling to pause their watch or start it again when they're also trying to clip in or clip out. And that's a great way to have an issue. So definitely enable auto pause if you aren't doing that. That's my bike safety insight of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm a huge Garmin Varia fan. I actually own like 3 of them now. So, and I'll take 2. I believe in them so much that if it's a really long ride, I'll actually bring a spare extra because they do have a limited battery life, maybe 4 to 5 hours when you first get them, maybe 6. You can sneak 6 out of them. But I feel like so strongly that just having that information of cars coming behind, if something's going to happen, something's going to happen. It's not going to prevent that. But it's amazing how much peace of mind you get from knowing, like, is there a car coming? Is there a car coming? Is there a car coming? And then just be like, okay, it's 100%. It just always tells you when there's cars coming. And so just that peace of mind and knowing that, oh, there's a little bit of a shoulder here. Okay, I see there's a car coming. Okay, great. I'm going to move from the left side of the white line to the right side and just do what I can do to stack the odds, like you said, with like bright colors and Varia, and don't mess around with your watch and stuff like that.
100%. 2 more quick insights for me. Number 1, again, I have said this before, but we're going to say it every time. If you are doing these long rides, you need to be taking in a minimum of 70 to 80 grams of carbs per hour on the bike, full stop. So make your fueling plan now and practice it. I've just had a lot of athletes who are reporting some level of not fueling enough during their big days. And so I just want everyone to know, like, this is the key to success. You will unlock your major performance potential. Don't just practice it in race sims. Practice it anytime you're out there for longer than, say, 75 minutes is usually where we start. Please fuel enough is that quick insight.
What's cool too, because I have athletes who maybe don't comment all the time, but then when they get the feeling right on these big days, they always comment. They go, "Oh my God, I felt so good. This was amazing. I really nailed my nutrition." And of course, I was like, okay, one, great. Number two, write it down so that we know what did you take today, and let's make that part of your plan. But it's amazing how people just go from just thinking like, oh, it's a fitness thing. It's like, no, it's just a fueling thing. And then they get so excited when they feel correctly. So I'm glad that we keep bringing this up over and over again, because like you say, it is the unlock, because people are working so hard. Our athletes are fit. And so if they fuel that fitness, they just get these results that they never dreamed that they would have.
That's totally true. Yeah. And if you listened to our podcast last week, Coach Elena took in 60 gels during her 100-mile ultra. So I don't want to hear that you can't take in more fuel, because she took 60 gels in one race. Okay, last insight from me is we are full on, as we've been saying, in race prep time. I would say the majority of my athletes are within 4 to 6 weeks of their A race right now, maybe even 3 weeks. This time of year is when you don't want to mess anything up. So my biggest goal as a coach, once we've completed that week 4 race sim, is that my athletes are fueling well, sleeping a lot, not getting injured, not doing like risky or dangerous things, and minimizing their life stress, because it just feels like this really precarious time where the fitness is there, we've done everything that we need to do, and it's almost just like a preservation mindset. So if there ever was a time to really embrace that monk lifestyle of I'm not going to do anything too crazy, it is definitely right now. So please just do everything you can to stack the deck in your favor going into your A race.
So is this you calling me out for riding my TT bike 5 days out from the race? Is that what this is all about? You should have said to me, Jim, the hay is in the barn. You're 3 weeks from your race. Like, don't ride your TT bike. Like, something might happen. I looked in the crystal ball.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I would not say I had this premonition, but it does track pretty well. Awesome. Okay. Well, I think with those insights all done, we are ready to move into our main topic for the day. Again, that show must go on. And we're actually kind of going to do a continuation of what we did last time, which was best practices for race week. Here, we'd also love to transition into what you're actually going to be doing on race morning and then during the race. So this will be geared a little bit more towards triathletes, who are our most common listeners, and athletes. But I do think there's a lot of takeaways here that could go to other races, especially in terms of just different elements of your routine. And we're going to talk about pacing, we're going to talk about gear, all of those things in terms of how you prep for that race. So with that, I think we will start with race morning. And the first thing that should happen on race morning that you're thinking about is your pre-race breakfast. So Jim, what are your thoughts on pre-race breakfast?
Yeah, so I've done a couple different ways. I used to have this thing like, it's a race morning, I've got to have a special breakfast. And I'd go to the grocery store and I'd buy all kinds of random things. And I go, this is my race breakfast. And it's like, I'd never eat peanut butter and bagels and bananas on a regular basis. But yet somehow I would do that on a race morning and I'd always feel terrible. So at one point I realized, hey, dummy, like the thing that I eat every single day and I go out and I do race sims with or just do big training with, like just get up in the morning and have a version of that. So maybe I can't have the full thing. And maybe I'll take some of it with me. I'll have when we first wake up. And if you're, traveling to the race site or you're waiting around, like I'll eat the rest of it then. But basically for me, it's like stick with what's familiar. But what's your go-to?
Yeah. And again, like for me, the banana and peanut butter and often oatmeal for me is the go-to, but that's only because I also have that before all of my big workouts. So +1 on like, if you have something that works, there's absolutely no reason to change it. The one thing I would add is sometimes it can be hard to get your normal number of calories down because it's like 4 a.m. and you're nervous and you're shoveling things down. If that's the case, just try to eat as much as you can and then bring snacks and stuff with you and bring electrolytes with you. And if you can kind of just graze the whole morning, that's a good idea. I'd also say that you want to bring snacks with you either way, because often if you're having breakfast at say 4 and the race starts at 7:30, you're probably actually gonna be hungry by the time 7 a.m. rolls around because it's been 3 hours since you last ate. So try not to, go super long periods without fueling, and having those little snacks throughout the morning is great. I also say taking a gel at the start is a great idea. So we usually incorporate something like that, or a block, or just some sort of hit of carbs.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's amazing how long you have to wait. And sometimes, you get to the race site and there's delays, there's wind delays, there's fog delays, there's smoke delays. And so suddenly, right, you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, had some breakfast, and then you're starting your race 7, 8. I've seen races start at 9 o'clock and you go, oh my gosh, I'm ready for lunch now. So big time delta between when you get up and when you have your quote breakfast and when you actually start the race.
Totally. And this brings up another big point that even if the forecasted temperature for the race is high, early in race morning can be really cold. So you should have a ton of layers with you because being cold actually burns a lot of energy and can make you super stiff. So bring sweatpants or tights, bring a jacket, bring lots of different types of warm clothes. And if you have a super long wait until the race starts, you actually could consider bringing a sleeping pad and a sleeping bag. We did this on the morning of St. George. There was a shuttle. We had to sit in a parking lot essentially for, I think, almost 2 hours before the race even started. So we brought camp pads, we brought sleeping bags, and we just laid there. And then we handed them off to our support crew after. And that was a huge game changer compared to people that are like standing around for 2 hours before doing an Ironman or sitting on some really hard ground. That's not the most conducive to feeling really good when your race starts. So all that gear is fair game for a long start race morning.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I've been surprised so many times that, I'm not a early morning riser. Some of our crew gets up at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So they see how cold it is at that time of the day. And so I rolled in when I was racing a lot. I was living in Alaska and I'd go down to the lower 48 and I'd race and I just wouldn't bring enough gear. I was like, I'm going down to it. It's really hot and got caught so many times. Like it's so cold in Lawrence, Kansas at 4 o'clock in the morning and the wind is ripping and you're panic buying, hats and gloves and windbreakers and just feeling very embarrassed because at home I have a whole closet full of these things. So yeah, it's amazingly how cold it is in the summertime in these locations.
Definitely. So that's the morning. You've got your clothes. You do everything that you need to do. We've talked through this in the past, kind of what that morning routine looks like. But I think now we want to transition to talking about how you can actually approach the race during it. So we'll kind of go through the swim, T1, bike, T2, and the run. And again, if your A race is just a run, maybe you take things from different sections here. But I think the first thing that we'll talk about with the swim is thinking about that cold water. So in general, if it's really cold, you might want to say wearing a double swim cap. You might want silicone earplugs. We've talked about how important it is to try to get a little bit of a warm-up in. And even if you can't get a huge warm-up in, try to take the beginning of the swim just a little bit easier so that you can adjust to that cold. There's going to be a lot of kind of shock variables going on from the crowds around you to the adrenaline of the gun going off. And that's kind of can be a cause of cardiac issues for a lot of people in the swim. We're not saying that that's necessarily going to happen to you, but even just that panic attack response comes from all of these crazy variables. So again, try to mitigate that as best you can with that warm up and then with keeping yourself warm.
Yeah, I'm such a firm believer in a swim warm up, but it turns out that a lot of these Ironman races, they don't have the facility to give you a place to warm up. So don't panic. But if that's the case, then just say, okay, the first 5 or 10 minutes, I'm going to wade in. And then also too, like if you're scared of the open water and you're in a big wave of people, you can just wait 15 seconds and just let everybody go. Let the craziness go. And 15, 20 seconds of you standing on the shore, just waiting for your wave to just go on means nothing in the big picture of your race time, but can mean everything. You go from like completely chaotic to like, oh, I've got the water to myself. Great. All you guys have gone ahead. Fine. Go for it. I'm going to get in. I'm going to build into my swim. You guys go do your thing. So just, either staying off to the side or just mostly just wait for a little bit of time. And that makes a huge difference.
Agreed. Now, talking a little bit more on the swim, let's think about pacing, which is going to be important. This relates to our conversation on how fast you're going to go out. But often at these Ironman races, at least in Half Ironmans, you have the opportunity to seed yourself. So that means you can decide where you line up in the group. And almost every single person is going to overestimate their swim time. They're going to assume that they swim faster than they actually do, mainly because you're going to swim faster in a pool often than you are in the open water. So we usually say you should seed maybe 1 to 2 groups ahead of where you actually think you're going to swim. So if you plan to swim an hour and 20 minutes for Ironman, you should seed yourself with the 110 group. And that will probably be a little bit closer to accurate. We wouldn't say to go to the very, very front of the field because you're going to get swum over if you're planning to swim a 120. But again, about 10 minutes faster for Ironman and maybe 5 minutes faster for Half Ironman would be a great place to start. Now, if you're doing short course or you don't have the opportunity to seed yourself, you should just kind of line up in the group where you think you might fall. So let's say you're with all the age groupers who are in your group and it's a mass start. If you're a really good swimmer, go to the front. If you're a pretty good swimmer, go in the middle. There's none of our swimmers who should really be in the way, way, way back unless you're very, very nervous about the swim because you're going to be a little bit more confident than that if you've done our swim program. But in general, don't tell yourself, oh, I'm a really bad swimmer. I shouldn't be in the front because there's a lot of really bad swimmers who are out there who are a lot worse than you.
Yeah, we have a pretty robust swim program, and we do a lot of, we swim, and number two, we do these race sims, and number three, we really focus a lot on navigation and sighting, like every 7 to 10 strokes. And I always tell people, like, you don't have to swim fast, you just have to swim well. And if you swim well, it turns out that you can beat a lot of people who are much faster than you, because we are just really looking to go buoy to buoy to buoy with superior navigation. So I was telling an athlete this weekend, like, I don't even really look at your swim paces per se when you're out in the open water, but what I'm looking for is indications that you worked your open water sighting into your stroke I do it every 7 strokes, and that you were just able to do that. It felt good. It felt natural. It's a little bit awkward at first, but just keep working on it. And after a few sessions, it'll click in, and you'll know you're doing it right, because it just becomes sort of automatic and it doesn't disturb your swim stroke at all. So our focus really here is, we want to swim, we want to race simulate in open water, and we just want to swim really well, buoy to buoy to buoy. And it's amazing how successful that is, just executing the very core fundamentals of swimming.
And your best swim is one where you don't swim an additional 200 to 500 yards. Like, that's going to be a lot faster. So
exactly.
We're always looking for shortcuts where you can just race smarter rather than necessarily racing harder. So that's a big one, is just swim the actual distance that the swim is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think this takes us into T1. You've gotten out of the water. Let's think about your strategy for T1, which is moving from the swim into the bike. So on some race courses, there are wetsuit peelers. They were formerly called wetsuit strippers. Now we call them peelers. You can use those volunteers to help you get your wetsuit off. That's, I think, a little bit more common in an Ironman race than a half Ironman. But again, you can basically just run out of the water. They'll rip it off for you, and then you take it with you to run into T1. If there are not wetsuit peelers, you should basically use the time between the water and T1 to lift your goggles onto your head, but don't take them off, because if you take them right off, you have something in your hand and you don't have your hands free to take off your wetsuit. You can then unzip your wetsuit and take it down to your waist, or just below your hips by the time you reach T1. In T1, you take off the rest of your suit and your goggles and your swim cap. Now, a big mistake that we often see people make is people sprinting as hard as they can directly out of the water and into T1. Remind yourself that nobody wins the triathlon in T1. You can certainly lose it if you go all out and burn all of your matches in the 2 minutes that you spend in T1. But at the end of the day, I think it's so much smarter to just be as relaxed as possible. Keep in mind that when you're swimming in a horizontal position and you go vertical, the blood's going to move all around your body. You might get lightheaded and your heart rate is going to skyrocket either way. So really, really focus on taking your time, resisting the urge to put on a show. And then in transition, you want to actually take your time moving on to the next part of your race.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard in these big races because you have these huge crowds, and this is the day you feel like a rock star. So you come out of the swim, and there's thousands of people jamming in, and they're all screaming, and and you see people just like, you just see their eyes get wide, and they just start running down the hill as fast as they can. So, but yeah, super calm, super easy. And then, especially if you're doing an Ironman, if you get into that tent, all your stuff has been pre-bagged. And the best thing you can do is slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And so take your time in there, take some breaths in there, make sure you take everything out of your bag, dump your bag out. And there'll be volunteers there helping you, but make sure you don't leave anything behind. I've left things behind before because I didn't dump my bag out. And also in T1, what we really recommend is, especially for the longer races, is having some substantial snack so that you're replacing the calories. If you think about, if you go and swim 4,000 yards with your master's group, and what's the first thing you do when you leave the pool area? You go right to the cafe and you order bacon and pancakes and eggs. And so what we're really trying to do is just, we recognize there's a big metabolic cost to the swim, and we want to have some snack, whether it's a half Ironman or Ironman, in T1 that helps start to replenish your glycogen.
Agreed. Yeah. And in an Ironman setting, it's not uncommon to spend 10 minutes in T1 or something like that, really sitting down. At the end of the day, the difference between 7 minutes and 12 minutes and 5 minutes is not really going to make a huge difference for your overall time unless you're really, really gunning for, say, an age group win or a Kona qualification. So at the end of the day, use that time wisely. And it's really easy to be eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich while you're putting on your bike shoes, while you're buckling your helmet. You can multitask a little bit. There is the way to go. Okay, so let's move on to the bike with that in mind. First thing we want you to be thinking about as you start the bike is immediately beginning your fueling strategy. So the one that we usually tell our athletes that worked really well for us is taking a sip every 15 minutes and a snack every 30 minutes. Again, you can do that in different ways if you want to, if it works better to do both a sip and a snack every 20 minutes or something like that. But in general, you want to be aiming to finish 1 bottle per hour and getting in those 70 to 80 grams of carbs. Now, we've talked about this many times before. You should have a plan for this. You are not making a decision on the bike about what you want to be taking and in what intervals. This is something that you shouldn't even have to think about. And honestly, your only job on the bike is to pedal and be on a rolling buffet and be on a schedule. So you are not waiting for hunger cues to eat. That is way too late if you're starting to get those hunger cues. Instead, first 15 minutes, even when you start the bike, take that sip, take that snack, and then kind of just keep that rolling for the entirety of the bike.
Yeah, and also just something I emphasize with our athletes with the race sim is, you start off a race sim, and we truly want it to be a race simulation. And so sometimes you don't get to swim with your race sim, but I always tell people like, okay, if you're doing a race sim, literally start in the first 15 minutes, reach down and grab your water bottle and take a sip. And then the first 30 minutes, start to take a snack and a sip. And it feels ridiculous because you're probably pretty well fueled and you're actually not hungry or thirsty. But again, we're just trying to drill in this idea of like you get on the bike and like you said, Katie, it's a rolling buffet and you start right from the very beginning. It's like, okay, I'm on, my whole entire day is broken up into 15-minute increments. All I have to do is pedal and breathe and just eat and drink every 15 minutes. And that's really your only job. It's simplified in some ways, right? And you're not worrying about cars or where I need to stop at the gas station or any of that kind of stuff. It's like, nope, get on your bike, pedal, do something every 15 minutes, and eventually it'll be over.
And keep in mind too that these demands are going to change a little bit if it's hot and humid out for a couple of different reasons. First of all, your hydration needs are going to go up. So normally we say about 1 bottle per hour, but if it's over even 70 degrees and or if the humidity is over probably 65%, those are just some estimates, you're going to want probably more like 1.5 bottles per hour. And that probably means that you're going to rely on hydration from the aid stations. So be planning for that or figure out a hydration carrying capacity on your bike that's going to allow that to happen. You should not necessarily just say, okay, no matter what, I'm going to have that 1 bottle, and just be willing to be a little bit flexible. When we're giving you these guidelines, it's really the floor. The other thing to think about here is sometimes when it's really hot, you can get a little bit more GI issues or just kind of feel a lot worse over the course of the bike. And that means front loading your calories is really important. So, if there's a world in which you're taking 100 grams of carbs in the first hour because you think it's going to peter down to 60 later on, do your best to keep it consistent. But again, front loading and overfueling, there's really no such thing as overfueling in these races, but taking more than you're planning, especially if you know that the day is going to get a lot harder with heat, is super, super smart.
Yeah, one of the big things about mentioning heat is this idea of thermal regulation. And once your core temperature reaches a certain temperature, it's nearly impossible to get it to cool back down again. So again, start keeping track on some of your warmer long rides and runs. So like, what is the heat? Again, we'll go back to the Jim Anderson heat index, which is just take the average temperature and the average humidity and say, okay, how did I feel? Did I need a bottle and a half? Was I getting super hot? Or one thing to look for is if it's super humid, sweat's not going to evaporate, like say off your forearms. So if you look down at your forearms, they're super shiny. You realize you're not really cooling. So just paying really close attention when you're doing training, when you're doing your race sims about thermal regulation and heat and humidity. And when do you start to feel like, oh, this is just a little bit too much. I need to back off maybe 5% on the watts.
And we've said this before, but it is okay to grab an icy bottle at an aid station during the bike and dump it all over you. I'm a huge fan of doing that for hot races. And I find that the 5 seconds that you might lose by slowing down to make that happen is 100% worth it, because if you overheat, you're going to have a really, really slow run.
And just one thing to bear in mind here is that we're talking about, this rainy, cold 40 to 60 degrees, and especially for New England athletes, maybe some of the Midwest folks as well too. And then what happens is some of these June races suddenly turn pretty hot. And I find that's when people really struggle the most, is they've done most of their training in this pretty cold weather, and then suddenly race day turns around and it's 70 or 75, 80, and the humidity is up to 70, and you go, oh my gosh, this is really, really hard. So just being careful, looking ahead at the weather and saying, okay, what do I need to do to manage my thermoregulation on race day, because I'm just not acclimated to it yet.
Definitely. All right, let's talk a little bit about pacing on the bike. So maybe we can talk about Half Ironman first. You want to be biking at sort of a 2 to 3 hour sustainable pace. And for most people, that's between 80 and 85% of your FTP. If it's hot, it might be more like 75% of your FTP, but we kind of see things about in that range. For Ironman, you're going at more of that 5 to 6 hour or longer sustainable pace. So that's closer to say 65 to 72% of your FTP. Again, on a really hot day, I've seen 60%. It's really just what you can sustain that keeps you in an Ironman below kind of LT1, which is where you're starting to get into this tempo zone. You want to be in a zone 2 effort the entire time. And then for Half Ironman, you want to be staying for sure below threshold. It's sort of like a Z2-3 effort for that. Now, I usually defer to heart rate on hot days for my athletes because it's really easy to get caught up in power and frustrated and totally overcook it. And keep in mind that when we think about race day heart rate, it's probably going to be about 10 beats above what you would normally see for a race. Don't worry too much about that. That's, related to the excitement, the nerves, the swim. If you're seeing a higher heart rate than that, just use the beginning of the bike to just really calmly breathe and get your heart rate under control. And I would actually ignore thinking about power there because it can sometimes just mess with you a little bit mentally. One other piece of data that's really, really helpful in thinking about racing is actually speed. So we've talked about this before, but we don't often actually train with miles per hour. But at the end of the day, when you cross the finish line, no one actually cares what your average power was. It's not something that you're going to get an award for, but you are going to get an award for being fast. And so you want to be strategic about, staying in aero on the flats, on the slight downhills, on the slight uphills, really anything faster than 14, 15 miles an hour. And then anything slower than once you get above 30, there's not really a huge difference. And it can be a little bit dangerous to be down in aero. But in that range, you should be in aero. You should be thinking about, taking the hills nice and light, but using the crest of the hill and then the flats and the downhill for a lot of aerobic efficiency. And at the end of the day, just tell yourself, I want the fastest ride possible, which does not mean smashing the power, for example, on an uphill. And don't worry too much if your power is not where you expect it to be, as long as your speed is overall.
Yeah, it's interesting. We spend so much time, on Zwift and doing all this percent of FTP for everything. But then we tell people, make sure you have miles per hour on your Garmin. And it's interesting because especially when you travel to a race, you don't know the geography. And so there's going to be places where there's a predominant wind. And what your miles per hour will tell you is that, I'm into a headwind here, or I'm in a false flat. I have an athlete who's heading out to Oregon, and apparently it's a sort of an out and back. And it is a predominant wind on the way out and then a tailwind on the way back. And so our race strategy really is that we're actually going to focus on watts, kind of giving a bit in that 85% of FTP area, kind of working kind of hard on the way out and then turning around on the way back, and then sort of focusing on miles per hour and using that as a guide to he can maybe come down to 70% of his FTP on the way back, especially if it's really fast. So there is a lot of valuable information. And as you are training, I would put that miles per hour up on your screen, and I wouldn't judge. I have a lot of athletes sometimes who judge their rides on miles per hour, and I would never do that. We judge them on your percent of FTP, but on race day, it just can give you a lot of information, especially if you're not familiar with that particular region.
100%. Now, something I just wanted to talk a little bit about, especially in the context of Ironman, but this can be an issue in Half Ironman too, is it's pretty easy to hit a mental low point sort of in the back half of the bike, maybe after mile 80 for Ironman, or even once you're past the 2.5 hour mark on the bike for Half Ironman. That's a really long time to be out there. And anecdotally, I would say the reason that sometimes feels so mentally hard is because you haven't even started the run yet. It's so daunting because you're like, I am in a lot of pain. This is terrible. And I still have to run a marathon. So, I would say also I've had some of my lowest points in a race actually on the bike rather than on the run, because at least when you start the run, you're like, well, I have less than 26 miles to go. That helps a lot. So a couple strategies to just kind of not let yourself get into that headspace are, number one, keep up your fueling. It's really easy to just kind of drop off your plan. Maybe you were great about it for 4 hours and then you just start to get sick of what you're doing, but stick to it even when things get hard, because a lot of the time, if you're feeling terrible, it might just mean that you need more food. You need more carbs, you need a snack, even go above that 70 to 80 and see if it helps. The other thing too is just reminding yourself that it will get better. There will be a low point on that bike, but you're actually going to feel awesome when you get a chance to switch your muscles, start the run, things like that. So don't assume that it's all downhill in terms of how you're feeling from your lowest point on the bike. I often feel like the first 5 to 10 miles of the run just feel amazing because I'm so glad that I'm not biking anymore. So again, it's going to be rough. You will hit that point. Finally, I've also drawn a lot of power from just connecting with other people out there. At Ironman Lake Placid, for example, the last part of the bike is these relentless climbs called the Three Bears, and there's a big headwind going on. It's really not so fun to deal with, but I've made some nice friends on the course where we're all just commiserating over how terrible it is. And last year there was a downpour during that time. Again, draw on the crowd and other people and other racers, because that can kind of help you get through those really mental low points that'll happen towards the end of the bike.
Yeah, those are great points. Nobody ever gets to mile 90 of an Ironman and says, I feel great. My butt feels awesome. I wish we could keep riding forever. Literally everybody. I can guarantee you even the pros feel that way. It's just a long time to be sitting on a bike. And like you say, that your mind starts to play games and go, well, if I fail this bad now, I'll never be able to run a marathon. And it's like, okay, that's probably really honestly your lowest point. And get some sugar in and recognize this is happening for everybody around you. Maybe people are pretty quiet and they're not saying anything, but I guarantee you everybody is thinking the exact same thing. Like, please God, get me back to T2, get me off this bike.
And this actually takes us to T2. So when you get into T2, you're going to hop off your bike. You'll usually in an Ironman, you'll get to hand it to a volunteer rather than having to re-rack it yourself. Although in a half Ironman, most likely you'll re-rack it yourself. And keep in mind that your legs are probably going to feel pretty weird. They might not be totally responding like you expect them to. That is also not a forever state. At the end of Ironman Lake Placid, this year I got off the bike and I could barely walk for just a minute or two as my legs were adjusting to that feeling. And I had a little bit of a panic moment where I was like, can I do this? Can I get out on the run? But by the time you get into the tent, you put your shoes on, maybe you stop at the porta potties, maybe you have a snack, you usually will feel okay to at least start that run. And then you can ease into it too. Again, you're not going to be sprinting out of T2. You want to play that pacing really, really well, but take your time in the transition tent to get yourself there the best you can. One thing I would say that is worth doing, especially in an Ironman, but even in a half Ironman, is it's common to start having like some chafing going on from the bike. There's things like Vaseline that makes a huge difference. So take the couple of seconds to put it on, maybe it's sunscreen, whatever it is. I've had some pretty rough skin situations after an Ironman, and I do think it's worth it to spend that time to just do what you need to do and avoid even worse chafing than you probably already have from a really long bike.
Yeah, once chafing starts, you can't think of anything else but chafing. So that's a very good call. And actually, I like stopping with usually people who are putting suntan lotion on. And actually, that's kind of a fun place to stop and just talk to the volunteers and let them just smear all this stuff all over your body. It's like, it's so disgusting and gross. And you're like, just embrace the experience of like, I've got all this gross lotion all over my body and people are enthusiastically putting it on my neck and my face and my arms and my legs. And you're like, God bless you people for doing this job, because this is the most disgusting job in the world. So I always like to stop there and also just thank them and joke around with them, because it is such a gross job, but super important to do.
But it definitely is. And just like we were saying with T1, also think about a good snack in T2. Once you get out of the run, you're probably going to be transitioning to more things like gels. So if there is anything that's more real food based, and especially if you got off your fueling plan for whatever reason on the bike, maybe you dropped something, maybe you just didn't want to, have some stuff in your T2 bag that you think might be extra appealing that you feel like you can run straight into for the run.
So I have a question about, so we always do these plans for bike nutrition plans. We try to stick to them. But so now we're on the run. And how do you execute your run nutrition plan?
So I always make a run nutrition plan, just like we make the bike nutrition plan. I would say that I have never fully stuck to it as I intended, but my goal is to stick to it for at least the first 13 miles. So in general, what that looks like for me is taking a gel every 2 to 3 miles and trying to get in some hydration at every aid station. But inevitably, there comes a point, usually after mile 12, 13, 14, where I'm like, I never want to look at another gel again for the rest of my life. And I have to sort of improv. And if you can actually stick to your fueling plan for the entire time, that's amazing. More power to you. But again, it's easy for your taste to kind of switch around a little bit. So for me, what that looks like is after I hit that tough point, I usually will just start thinking about what is appealing to me right now. I know that I need to get in carbs. And almost every Ironman that I've ever done, that has just been the flat Coke at the aid stations, which you have to take a lot of Coke in order to get the carbs that you really need. But hopefully I've been fueling really, really consistently up through that point throughout the bike and through the first half of the run, that even if I'm a little bit under on the back half of the run, I can dig deep and kind of just use whatever little fumes that I have left to get through it. So I will switch to that flat Coke. And then if I can sneak in like 1 or 2 more gels. But I guess what I would say here is don't judge it too much if you start to not be able to follow things as well during the back half of the run, and even plan for that by banking food. Put food in the bank when you're on the bike, and then also in the first half, because it will inevitably get a little bit harder.
I think also what's important too is to think about, there's going to be some food and drink offering almost every mile on a half Ironman and Ironman. So really your job is just to go like mile to mile, get something in, walk through the aid station, get some food and drink, and then realize there's somebody a mile away who's going to give me more of this stuff. So it does feel a little daunting. A mile can feel really, really long, especially if it's hot and humid, which it typically is now at this point in the day. But just giving you perspective, like there's a lot of volunteers here. People want to help me. If you need something at an aid station, call it out. They'll maybe have extra salt or just something else, but people are there to help, making sure you're getting the water over your head, the ice down your tri kit. I like to put ice in my hands. I like to put ice in my mouth as I leave those things. But again, lots of folks there to help you on your journey, and they're going to be there every mile. So just take full advantage of all that's out there on the course.
And mentally, I think actually a great way to think about the run is not that you have to run 13 or 26 miles, whether it's a half Ironman or a full Ironman. It's I have to run 1 mile 13 times, or I have to run 1 mile 26 times. And you mentally reset after each aid station. Again, sometimes they're spaced a little bit differently, but in general, that's going to be the cadence of what you're getting. And just saying, I need to get to the next aid station is really powerful, because you can reward yourself with a little 10-step walk or something like that as you get through those aid stations. I think you'll see, if you've looked at some professional athletes, I remember Chelsea Sodaro got a lot of credit for having a blazing fast run when she won the Ironman World Championships. And I believe she walked through every single aid station and still averaged probably in the 6s for her marathon pace. So it doesn't mean you can't be going fast. It's so much more important to get the fuel that you need. And I think that mental break helps a lot. Again, chunk it out. Never tell yourself, I have 24 miles left. Say I've got 1 mile, and then we will reevaluate how I'm feeling and get to the next one.
And also part of that walking, I think for Chelsea was in that race was what did she say? She said, I'm investing in managing my core temperature. And so, yeah, at this point, it is generally super hot. You're on the tarmac and we're all suffering at that point. So yeah, use those aid stations to get the calories in and just get that heart rate down and get your core temperature down just a little bit.
And then I would say, just like with the bike, you are going to have some significant mental low points on the run. If you can avoid them, that's awesome, but it's really, really common. And I would say the run is where you really want to start pulling out some of those mental strategies, that mental toolkit that we've talked about. Having something like a mantra or having something that you're going to recall when the going gets really tough is super powerful here, because you're going to be tired and physically you've kind of spent everything that you have. This is where the game becomes very, very mental. And again, you can manage as much as you want with taking ice and taking fuel, but you're also going to have to dig really deep. So practicing that in your race sims and outlining everything before you go in of what you're going to say when you're feeling discouraged, what you're going to say when you're feeling tired, what you're going to say when you just don't want to be out there anymore. I think that's super, super helpful. And you might have to try a lot of different things, have a couple different tools in that toolkit, because, having that mantra, it might not actually work as much as you hope that it would. And then you're going to need to pull out your backup mantra, or you're going to have to ground in your breathing or whatever it is. The idea is be armed with a plan, keep the fueling going, keep the hydration going, and you'll have the best chance of success. I
think it's a good shout out to listen to the interview with Coach Elena. I think this is where the ultra runners can really teach triathletes a lot. Again, we talk about race sims and putting people in situations that feel challenging and make it feel like race days. But, we can't have somebody run 26 miles off a race sim. But I feel like the ultra runners, they're very mentally tuned in. And Coach Elena has done an incredible job just articulating what she does. And these are the things I'm going to say at these specific times. If I'm feeling these specific emotions, I'm going to say these specific things to myself. So this is a great time to listen to that interview and also just to see what other folks in other sports are doing to help manage the mental load.
And the last thing I'd say to that too is, if you're really having a tough time, the crowd of other racers is something that I find really, really powerful. So when I was at Kona this year, I ended up running almost 15 miles with this same woman who I met on course. It turned out we had both qualified at Lake Placid. It turned out she lives in Boston. And we weren't talking a lot, but we were talking enough that we just knew that we were in it together. And I honestly think I would have walked a whole lot more of that marathon. I really didn't walk at all if I hadn't been with her. And she was probably hurting just as much as I was. But the idea is, find someone out there who can be your buddy, even just for a mile. Pace off them, be near them, and know that they're experiencing the same things. Use them for energy, and then you can kind of build them up as well. So that's something you're not out there alone. We've talked about this before. It's a big, big community effort.
Sure, yeah. What we say, you enter the race an individual and you come out part of a community.
For sure. So this brings us to the end of the race. Once you kind of hit that last mile or to that finishing chute, I can tell you from experience that you probably actually will start to feel a little bit better there than you have when you're halfway through or something, because you're so close to the end. The energy is so good and you can finish. So actually just try and soak that in. It can be a very emotional time for people. I've definitely gotten pretty choked up in the last mile or two of an Ironman, just reflecting on everything you did to get there. So don't be afraid to soak that in. And try to smile as you come down the chute, because you'll thank yourself when you get those really cool photos and you deserve them, and high fives, do all of that. It is a really, really special moment. So if that's something that you can also ground in as you're kind of suffering the run, just this is going to feel so good when I finish. Keep that in mind as you're finishing up.
Yeah, awesome. Great. Wow. So we've covered a lot. It's a lot of information. And we're just want to emphasize that we always have all this posted on the extended show notes as well too. So you don't have to take notes. That'll all be right there for you.
Definitely. Yeah. And again, if you're racing other races, hopefully there are still some takeaways that you can pull out of these. And just keep in mind, I think the number one thing we've said the most today is heat management and fueling, as well as mindset stuff. So it's all very separate from the actual swim, bike, run of the whole experience. And at the end of the day, those are the things that people need the most advice on and that I think are the most important for determining race day success.
So are you saying we focus on training principles in this podcast? Is that what you're saying?
Maybe, actually. I would say the principles, what do we say? The principles to, I don't even remember our jingle.
Somebody says something at the beginning of this podcast. I don't remember what they said, but they
I don't know who they are.
Principles and something else and blah, 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 blah. I don't know. So,
Yep. Anyway, with that, let's segue into our last couple of segments. We have a handful of quick listener questions. So first one, if I am racing on a road bike for a triathlon, should I get clip-on aero bars? So I think my answer to this is if you have a really, really hilly race, I don't know that it's necessarily worth it to get the clip-on aero bars just because you're going to be out of aero on the climbs and you can probably get a similar aero benefit by riding on the drops. But if it's a flat race, they probably do confer a pretty big advantage. I would say at the end of the day, race wheels or a triathlon bike are going to make a much bigger difference than aero bars put onto a road bike. But the biggest thing here is that if you do get aero bars, you want to make sure you get a bike fitting with those aero bars and that you practice during race sims. So the reason I'm hesitating to recommend this is I've had a couple people ask, 2 or 3 weeks out from their A race, I've been riding a road bike all this time. Should I get clip-on aero bars? And I'm kind of like, it's a little bit late to change something big at that point. So I would actually just make your body really aero on the drops and you'll probably be in a pretty similar position.
Yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, 2 or 3 weeks too far out. You're asking maybe 12 weeks out, 14 weeks out. Then for me personally, I always tell people get aero bars. And even if you're just in aero 25% of the time, if that's 25% of the time, you'll be going a lot faster than you would be just sort of sitting up. So again, racing is all about velocity. It's all about speed in the end of the day. And so what aero bars just allow you to do is reduce your frontal drag. But yeah, like you said, you have to get them. You have to practice with them and nothing new on race day.
All right, next question. I will kick this one to you, Jim. Should I learn two-beat kicking? And actually, what is two-beat kicking for people who don't know?
Oh, such a good question. Yeah, so most, I always say people suffer from AOS, which is adult onset swimming. And so if you suffer from AOS, you probably should be a two-beat kicker. And basically a two-beat kick is kicking once every stroke. And so it's really just meant to facilitate the movement of your hips and your shoulders for the rotation. So you're rolling and reaching and pulling. But you're really not trying to get any kind of power out of your legs. Most folks don't have a natural, power coming from the legs unless they came from a background of maybe running, for example, or soccer. Like those folks tend to have a lot of power coming from the back, but they also then tend to be disconnected in their front as well too. So even if you have powerful legs, I've also taken a lot of swimmers and had them go to a two-beat kick so they're relaxed and they're just in sync with their upper body. And especially if I have wetsuit on, you're going to be kind of cruising along. So if you don't know what a two-beat kick is, look up on YouTube. There's tons of information there, or just reach out to us. But I really advocate a two-beat kick for probably 99% of triathletes.
I do too. And we will link a video in the show notes that just shows you what that kicking is. But I would say I actually don't even really know how to swim without a two-beat kick. That was what I learned early on. I also suffer from AOS, adult onset swimming, and I can swim much faster with that two-beat kick. And the nice thing about it is if you're doing a two-beat kick, you're barely expending any energy from your legs. It's almost like you're not kicking at all. You're driving from just your hips and your upper body. And it's nice because then you get out of the water and you're like, great, my legs are completely fresh. I've barely even used them. Whereas if you're going to generate a ton of power and be slashing around, you're going to have pretty tired legs by the time you get out of the water. So we're racing smarter here. You're not going to use your arms that much in the bike and the run. So the idea is that's where they're working in the swim for sure. So third question we have is an athlete reported to me recently that they have just been feeling super, super hungry on a rest day or once a taper starts. So why does that happen and what should we do about it? And I'm glad this athlete brought it up because it's actually really, really common for athletes who are training at a really high level. There can be a little bit of an appetite suppressant effect, when we're doing hard stuff all the time. And it sometimes takes slowing down and doing a little bit less for the body to play catch up and say hey, we've been working super hard. I am really, really, really hungry right now. So what I would say is that's a good sign to just honor that hunger and fuel the work as much as you can. It's not, I'm training less, so I need to fuel less. It's no, I am depleted and I need to refuel. So think about the taper and recovery days and recovery weeks, anytime you're feeling that way, as a time to fill up what is probably a pretty empty tank, even if you didn't actively feel like that. And it could also be a sign of different underfueling that can happen just in the context of really, really heavy training. So I would keep an eye on stuff like that. One thing I would add too is make sure that you're getting enough fat in your diet during these recovery times, because I think there's a huge emphasis on carbs and protein for endurance athletes. But in terms of feeling full, sometimes we're a little bit low on the fat variable. We've said to avoid like really high fat stuff in just the 1 to 2 days leading up to a race, but all the other time, make sure things like peanut butter and other types of healthy fats are a component of your diet, and you hopefully will feel a little bit better as you're refueling your body.
And to bring it back around, actually, if you have major injury as well, you're also not exercising much, but you can be super, super hungry. And I learned this. So at the hospital, they actually said, you got to really focus on eating, you got to really focus on a high protein diet. I'm like, yeah, I got that. And then I got home, and actually our friend Noah, who was in a bike crash last year and had a big recovery, his first point to me was, you're going to have to eat a lot. You need to fuel. Like if you think you're sitting around, no. You are doing major repair of bone and muscle. And so you just, eat. And so my appetite has actually, feel like it's increased because I'm not training. So yeah, again, super important. Fuel, and bring snacks.
Awesome. All right. Last segment here, gear pick of the week. So I am going to recommend my very favorite bib shorts. And this is a company. So I thought it was pronounced Orno, like the French ORNOT. And then I found out it's an American company and it's actually just pronounced or not. So their slogans are like, buy our bike shorts or not, which is kind of cute. But anyway, I am recommending the Ornot cargo bib shorts. These are bike shorts that have this pocket on the side that I absolutely love because it's really sleek. If there's nothing in it, it just is smooth against your leg, but it's a great place to stick a phone or a snack where you can really easily access it. And the bibs are really comfortable, and I pretty much wear these exclusively as my bike shorts right now. I love them. They have a regular version, and then they actually also have a thermal version, which thermal shorts sound kind of funny, but if you're in that shoulder season weather and you've got maybe thermal shorts on and some knee warmers, that's perfect. It's great for if you're starting and it's 45 degrees and then it's going to eventually get to 60 degrees later in your bike. So huge recommendation for the Ornot men's and women's cargo bib shorts.
Yeah, and I'm going to follow that same theme because I just love this company. You said they're based in California, and everything is sewn in California. So they employ people right in San Francisco to create all of their bike gear. And I bought their shorts and their pants, which are really snazzy looking. You can use them for, I was telling Katie before, this is the pants. You could actually go to a wedding in the pants, and you actually could ride your bike in the pants. These are just regular pants, and the shorts are great as well too. So my gear pick of the week is the Ornot. I thought it was Orno as well too at first. The Ornot shorts and pants, and we'll put links to those.
I love the idea of going to a wedding in Ornot pants. That's just awesome. I'll see if they have dresses. I usually wear dresses to weddings, but maybe they have dresses for me.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for listening as always. And again, Jim, really glad that you're doing okay. And thank you for sitting up. I'm sure this was a long time to let that swelling go. So I'm going to let you go get some ice and lie down and feel a little bit better. But yeah, thank you everyone for listening. Please consider leaving us a rating or review, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, peeps.